Quitting into nowhere, leaving a big corporation for a startup, and taking a junior role after leading an international team. These three scenarios were my absolute biggest nightmares 5 years ago. When I started my career, I thought that progress was linear. I thought that every move had to be bigger than the last. High title, bigger company, more responsibility. Turned out that plan was only good on paper. In this video, I will share 3 stories that happened one after another and felt like my biggest failures. Looking back now, I understand that this was the exact points that let me advance much faster than 90% of people my age. If you're new here, hi, my name is Alina. I started my career in tech at 18 as a content manager, got to lead an international team at 20, and fell back into a junior role at 21. All to get my dream job of being a product manager at 22. My first stable job was really good on paper. Big company, stable team, a really good manager, and work that I enjoyed doing. I had just enough control over the product to feel like I'm making a difference and not to feel overwhelmed by responsibility. At the time, I was an SEO content manager, meaning optimizing content on the website the way that it ranks higher on Google. It was a job that I liked because I always genuinely liked creating content and editing it and working with the writers and publishing and learning technical skills. It was not my first job, but I was very young. I was 19, the youngest on my team, and my manager figured out pretty quickly that I learn really fast and gave me all the opportunities to advance my technical skills. Over that year, I advanced a lot in my skills without having to fight for my life and to put out fires every day. It was a good place to be, but at some point I hit a certain ceiling, which I realized I'm not growing as much within the company, so I started attending networking events. There were events from other companies in the city I was living at the time, and they were on topics I was interested in, like being a product manager potentially. At some point I signed up for an event that was bigger than all the previous ones and involved a competition. They were pretty open about the opportunity to get hired by this company, but I had no intention to leave the place I was in because it was stable and I was treated well. At the same time, I did pass the competition to get in onto that event, and then I did perform pretty well on the event. I realized that the hiring managers liked me, and then after this event was over, they contacted me wanting to talk about a potential hire. I was very skeptic about it because it was a company much smaller than the one I was working in at the time, with a very young team, and I felt like I don't know enough about them. At the same time, they had perfect communications. How they talked about themselves in the interviews, how they communicated their values, how they promoted their products. It felt like they really know what they're doing and that they're a very product-focused company, which was exactly what I was interested in at the time. I wanted to be a product manager. So after several interviews, I was convinced enough to change my job, and I quit my previous company. In a way, it was a blessing because this kind of company is what usually gets people stuck when you have a job just good enough not to leave, but not good enough to grow in it. It's like you could do better somewhere else, but you're too lazy to change anything, so you just stay in one place and years pass by, and then you realize it's been 10 years and you're still in the same place. So in my case, I avoided it and I made a jump to another direction and to a different type of work that I thought is bringing me closer to my goal. We agreed that I'm gonna be a product content manager for a rapidly growing product in the education niche on the US market. As soon as I joined, I realized that a lot of the points during the interview process were actually red flags that I ignored, and now I'm getting immediate payback about it. What I ignored was that they missed an interview once and then professionally apologized for it. One of my friends had an interview with this company before and they also missed the interview. What I didn't realize is that it was a very good representation of the fact that they don't have good processes within the company. It's very messy inside and they're struggling themselves. Next point I ignored was that they were texting me in the evenings and on the weekends, meaning the team does not have any work-life balance whatsoever, they're just working all the time. Next points were about what I couldn't really know, like the fact that they require you to be in the office almost all the time, 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. And if you leave the office during the day, even for 15 minutes, you need to text the group chat about it and say where you're going. This was one of the biggest shocks for me. There was not too much pressure about it, just I still did not like the idea that everyone has to do this. Because why would I care if someone's going to get a coffee during the day? And the last but not least, actually the worst point of what went wrong, is that the product that they hired me for to be a product content manager did not really exist. They had a product and they had zero intention to make it better. They said we are doing performance marketing and we're gonna work on promoting the product, and they were selling a product that did not exist. So they were showing the ads of how cool the product is inside, and then when users already get get the subscription and go into the product, they see that it looks much more basic and has much less contents than they were promised. At the start, I thought that's okay. I'm already here. There's not much I can do. I only can work with what I have and try to convince them to put more resources into the product and to make it look better as soon as possible. Unfortunately, it only made things worse rapidly because they started being more open about the fact that they are not planning to give any resources to the product, that they need to make money for the company to survive, and that they just need users to pay without giving them anything back. So it was pretty much a scam company with a bunch of messed up rules. At the time, I was super involved with what I was doing. I really wanted to make a difference with some product. I was already dreaming about how I can build a career in this specific place, in this city. So this moment was a really big disappointment for me. At the same time, I was graduating uni, so I had to work on my diploma. I didn't have time to look for a job on the side of having a job. So I said, I'm gonna stay here as long as I can. I'm gonna look for a job as slowly as it needs to be, and then I'm only going to quit when I already have the offer. What happened instead is that I realized how impatient I really am when I am in an environment that I don't like. I was forced to make changes on the product that I did not believe in. My every initiative was ignored even when it was supported by data, and the only changes we agreed to make on the product were reasoned by the management as they see it this way and they want it this way. So when I realized I'm not gonna grow this company and I feel a lot of pressure from just doing what I don't like with my time, I just quit. Into nowhere, having no backup plan except that I have applied for several companies before quitting, did not get many replies yet, knew that I'm also graduating uni at the time, but staying was too much for me, so at some point one conversation with the manager just ended with the fact that we no longer work together. So it was a bit shocking for me, but I did not regret it because it's been 3 months I've been with this company and the amount of mess was more than it ever happened to me in any company before this. It was not my second job. I had messy stories before this one, but this was just the worst. So I did not regret leaving it because I was already kind of burnt out from working and not growing and feeling like I'm wasting my time. I decided to take it easy and rest a bit while only doing the interviews and not working. But somehow I got a new job in 2 weeks, even sooner technically. I quit this chaotic job on a Wednesday, had my first interview on Friday, and then on Tuesday next week I already accepted the offer. Then 1 or 2 weeks later I already started working. The new job did not seem like a real offer because it was a very small startup. It had 4 co-founders and I was the first person they hired. They hired me from a job post that was completely unrelated to what I do at work. I was a content manager at the time, an SEO content manager, a product content manager, and I applied for a job that said SEO specialist. I had some technical skills from the first stable jobs that I talked about, so I thought if I have to work here, it's okay. I don't hate it. There is stuff I still want to learn. I'm interested. I have some sort of competence. So I thought it's not a bad idea. And it was also a startup from the Netherlands, meaning I liked what they were ready to pay. So I came to this interview with almost zero research. I didn't know how small the startup was, but still I thought it's not going to hurt to talk to them. So I came to this interview and they said, we're looking for an SEO team lead. I said, I'm not an SEO team lead. I'm not even an SEO specialist. I'm a content manager. So our conversation started in a way that I thought there's no way we're gonna work more together. But still, because they're a very young, innovative startup and I'm young and interested in what I'm doing and what they're doing, we just had a conversation about how we see work, about how we approach certain tasks. They shared a bit about their company, I shared about my experience. And after this, I remember I told my friends that I'm not gonna work with them because this is clearly not a match. They're not looking for anyone who does content. I'm not looking to be an SEO team lead. And I thought this story is over. But same night, 1 a.m. to be precise, if I remember correctly, they texted me and they said, we are open to create this position for you because we believe it can be helpful for the startup. I didn't think it was a very reliable idea, but I didn't have anything to lose because I didn't have a job. So I thought, okay, it's gonna be an interesting experience anyway if we agree to work together, because we still had to have another interview and agree on how we see our cooperation. So they created a vision for what they believe I can do for the startup, if I'm okay with it, if I have any other ideas, We had another long conversation, after which they were ready to send an offer, which I accepted. To be honest, it was one of the most interesting experiences, if not the most interesting experience in my career, because we were working a lot with AI. We were using agents. I was creating agents. I have really valuable experience from there at optimizing work, at replacing certain tasks with AI. Still, my most interesting case, as I believe, is when I optimized a task that was taking me to make 4 to 6 hours, and AI agent, or to be precise, 4 AI agents combined, they could do it in 7 minutes, with me giving just a fixed input that's the same every time. The same structure but different contents, because it was about content, obviously. I joined as a content manager, but they were ready to expand the team. So they hired 2 content writers whom I was managing, and then they hired a content manager, and I became a head of content. This job was the most exhausting job in my life, because startups need to do a lot to survive, and because this startup was tiny and at the very beginning stage with very young co-founders who didn't know a lot about how certain processes work and were not very open to listen at some points, which I don't judge them for anything, just there were points when I could clearly see that we are doing stuff wrong. I was talking to them, but they didn't listen to me about this, which I thought that's fine, it's their business, they have the right to decide. But still, I was the one who had to work 12 hours a day to manage dozens of tasks at the same time during the day, to explain sometimes over and over about why certain stuff doesn't work and why we should do it differently. But they were really focused on how they believe the company should work. That's fine, that's their company. And then at some point I decided to move abroad, because I'm Ukrainian, there's war in my country, and at some point I realized that I'm not ready to stay in such an unsafe environment longer, so I decided to move. What seemed the most risky part of this was the fact that I could feel something's going wrong with the startups. The clients are not as happy as they should be. There were some breaches in communication between the founders of our startup, the agency, and the client. I'm not gonna go into detail about this. It's their business, their companies, they do whatever they want. But then I was about to go to a foreign country where I don't know anyone, to start over with not as much savings, and losing a job would be really bad for me. So I was worried about this. I was asking them about how things are going, if we really are doing okay, to which they were saying yes, everything's fine, we're doing okay. And then at some point when I already moved, I was cut off from all the communications between management of the company, which they were not open about the fact that I'm cut off, but I could clearly feel it, because I knew there's some sort of discussions that I'm not included in. And then one day they just cut off all the access to the services from me. This is what I saw happening. I just didn't have access to our tools anymore. I started asking the chats about what's happening, if we changed any passwords that I don't know about. And then immediately after this message, content writers started texting the chat just with a very small message, because they didn't have as much time. They said, thanks everyone for working here. And then after this, they were immediately deleted from the channel in Slack. I already realized what is happening. I was shocked, because I didn't even get to say anything to the people who were extremely efficient in what they were doing. They were part of my team, because I was head of content and I had people working on the tasks I was assigning them. I was doing one-on-ones with them to see how they feel in the company, if we are doing fine. And I had no idea about what's happening, about the fact they were laid off. And I didn't even have a chance to say to them that they were really amazing in what they were doing. This really was the best content team I have ever worked with, and with how much was required of them, they were doing an amazing job. So I didn't get to say this, and after this I had a meeting with the co-founder of the company, and he shared with me what was happening only then, after they were all gone. He said they laid off the whole team, and to me they gave a choice. The reason being they don't really need as much content, which was technically part of what I was already talking to them before, that we should do things differently. So they said maybe that's why. But then I was the first person they hired, so they didn't tell me that I'm fired or anything like this. They sort of gave me a choice that I can either stay and make it work, or I can go if I want. The choice was obvious. What's the point for me to stay to prove anything if I have already put in more than enough into what I was doing, and if I was communicating what I believe believed should be done differently. I wasn't heard. I had a moment of doubt because it's been a week since I moved to Spain, and losing a job to me it seemed like a catastrophe, but staying was also not an option. So I said goodbye, and the story ended very badly for me, I believe so, because the panic and the amount of fear I had when I just arrived to a new country, I have no idea where I am, what I'm doing, and losing my only income source was really scary. But at the same time, I thought maybe it's for the best, because adapting in a new country with a schedule like this when I have to work all the time, it was also not okay for me, especially because all the time I have worked with a startup before, I was still in Ukraine and we had major blackouts during all this time, meaning I had no electricity at home and I was just running from coffee shop to coffee shop between different areas to have connection. Because of the attacks, we didn't have electricity and I had to find places where I can work from. I was always somewhere in loud places, just looking for the opportunities to do my job. So it was really exhausting, because it was not only the fact that I was working a lot, but also the fact that I was working in extreme conditions. So when I got laid off, I thought maybe it's for the best, because now I have an opportunity to rest a bit, to figure out all the documents, to find accommodation, because all of this requires time and the opportunity to go out of the house during the day if necessary. And I didn't have days off in the startup. So I thought that's for the best, that's fine, I will find a new job eventually. After this, I spent 6 months unemployed. I spent all my savings, and this was the most difficult job search in my life. The longer I work in tech, the more difficult it gets to find a job for anyone. Obviously, it's not just for me. We all know that the job market is complicated now. And for me, also the biggest problem was that I have just worked as a head of content in a startup where I was leading an international team. I had content writers from the Philippines, content manager from the UK, and founders from the Netherlands. And I was the manager. So this was already on my CV, and when I was applying to jobs, I was not hired for roles like content manager, content specialist, content writer, for the reason of being overqualified, because everyone was scared I would just get really bored and leave as soon as I find a better job, which might have been wise of those companies, because it could be the case, even though it was not my plan, but I knew it could happen potentially. And at the same time, I was not good enough to be a manager in any company, because I was working with a startup where the main task as a start is just to make it work. You're doing a lot of new stuff and it's very unorganized. And when you're coming to a company where processes are already more or less structured, you need to know how to manage the structure. And I didn't have this experience. So I was already too good for basic roles and not nearly good enough for managerial roles. And I was stuck in the middle for 6 months before I found a new job. The position I found is I would believe, my most stable job for now. I'm doing what I like, and I finally got to work with product. I went back to working for corporate. I believe that stability is a scam, and it does not really exist, especially with how many layoffs there are now, even in big companies in tech. But still, working for a corporation is much more stable than working for a startup, because anything can happen to a startup, and the first bump on the road, like it happened with the startup I was working for, and they're ready to lay off almost the whole team. So corporation worked more than well for me, and the position I was hired for was product content manager, meaning it was different from what I have been doing before, but it was related. So my skills were really helpful, but I was not too good because I didn't have specific experience with what we were working on in this company. And then after a year, I got promoted to a product manager, which I wanted to be for a really long time. So it's a win for me. At the same time, I am a junior product manager after being a head of a department. So from the outside, it sounds like it's crazy to go from a manager to a junior. But what happened to me, and what I know happens to some other people, many people in fact, as soon as you get to being a manager, you realize that you don't really want it, because the amount of responsibility needs to be really worth it for you. You need to know why you're doing it. You need to be really obsessed with the idea of working for someone else's business. You're just investing a lot of your time and effort into someone else's ideas. So for me, it was too much. Maybe I was just too young for this and I didn't handle it at the time, or I didn't want to handle it, let's say. But anyway, I don't regret going to a junior position. Does it mean that I'm making less money? Technically, yes, but honestly, I wouldn't say so, because we need to evaluate how much our time is worth. And if in the previous company I was working 12 hours a day with no days off, with no sick leave, with no benefits, then in this company I'm working fixed hours. I don't have to work overtime. I have vacation. I have sick leave. If I'm getting sick, I don't have to work, which is obviously how it should be in all the companies. But unfortunately, it is not how it is. I also have benefits, like I get my beauty services covered, or I can get some of my hobbies covered if I want. Obviously, there's a limit, but at least these benefits, they exist, like medical insurance, for example. It is really necessary, it, and these are hidden benefits of working for corporations that we don't understand before we get a chance to compare. So after all of these bumpy experiences, after all this mess, my main conclusion is that we don't need to be scared of what seems like a failure, because from every situation there's a lot to learn. Even if it seems like it's a major downgrade, sometimes it is really necessary. Maybe we need to work on our health, maybe we need to get back our quality of life instead of just working 24/7. Maybe there's a more interesting type of work that we need to do. For example, I really love content. As you can see, obviously I have a YouTube channel, but I like doing it for myself, and when I work for a company, I would much rather learn technical skills while being a product manager and know how the product works in a complex view, seeing it from different sides, learning from different people, developers, analytics, content managers as well that I still work with. So I believe now from this experience I'm getting much more than I was getting from my previous roles, even though it seemed to me like I am downgrading every time that I'm going to a new place. So if you are in a position where you want to take some sort of risk that feels unsafe to you, just remember that stability is a scam. It does not exist. No place is forever. Even if it seems to you like you're choosing between an offer to a really stable company and an offer to a startup where you can grow, even if you lose a job in a startup, you might learn much more than in a corporation. Or maybe at the time your health is more valuable to you, your physical and your mental health, and you don't want to accept the offer where it seems like you will grow a lot. You just want to slow down and have a stable position. That's okay as well. You just need to know what works best for you in a specific time of your life. Taking any decision is perfectly fine. So as long as you enjoy it, there is no wrong decision. If you enjoyed this video, if these stories were helpful and valuable for you in any way, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel not to miss the new videos, and see you in the next one.